Now I'm going to show you some famous checkmate patterns, which are famous because they happened during some famous chess games in the past. The first one is called Legal's mate. It's named after Legal, who was playing white in this game. And the game started like this. Alright, so let's have a look at this position. Here the knight on f3 is pinned, but because there is a special checkmate pattern that I'm going to show you now, white shouldn't worry about this pin and they can easily capture the pawn on e5. Even though they're losing the queen, this is not a problem because there is a checkmate in 2, starting with bishop f7. The black king doesn't have a choice but to move to e7, and here it comes knight d5 checkmate. So this is what we call Legal's checkmate pattern. Try to remember this one so you can use it in similar positions. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. Could be something similar like what happened in the following game. Alright, so this is what happened in this game. This game started like this. As you can see, black is trying to attack the knight on f3, which is already pinned. But if you remember Legal's mate pattern, you shouldn't worry about this. Because here it is, the same pattern, sacrificing the queen and then checkmate in 2 moves. Knight d5 checkmates the black king. So once again, this was Legal's mate pattern. Now I'm going to show you another famous checkmate pattern called the opera mate pattern. So this is the position that you need to know in which you can use the opera mate pattern. First, let me show you quickly how we came to this position. It was a game which happened in 1858 at the Opera House in Paris, where Paul Morphy was playing white against the Duke of Brunswick and Count Isoard, who were playing together, consulting each other. They were trying to play against the strongest player at that time, Paul Morphy, who was so confident that he was actually playing blindfolded. And this is how the game started. Here it is, the whole game. Paul Morphy sacrificing a knight because he can see a checkmate coming in a few more moves. Even though he was blindfolded, he can see this. So here it is, the position that I was explaining to you that you need to remember. Because in this position there is a checkmate in 2 for white, starting with a beautiful queen sacrifice on b8, checking the black king. Black doesn't have a choice but to capture the queen. And here it comes a rook d8 checkmate. So this is what we call the opera mate. So let's see this once again. Queen b8 check, rook d8 checkmate. So that was arguably the most famous game in the history of chess. Now I'm going to show you another famous chess game which happened in 1911 in Vienna, where Reti was playing white against Tartakower black. And this is how the game started. This is the Caro-Kann defense. Here it looks like black are sacrificing the pawn on e5, but that's only temporarily because of the fork with the queen on a5. And then black captures the pawn back. Now, from this position, white would be tempted to do queenside castling, but if they do so, they're going to lose the knight on e4. Still, they did this queenside castling because of the following Checkmate, which is famous because of this game. This is what happened. Black took the knight, and here it comes. A beautiful queen sacrifice. Black are forced to capture the queen. Now comes the double check with the bishop on g5. The black king doesn't want to go to e8 because he's going to be checkmated by the rook on d8. So the king moved to c7 instead, but still he got checkmated by the bishop on d8. So here it is, the Checkmate. Let's see this once again. Check, double check, checkmate. That's the Checkmate that we need to remember. Here we have another famous checkmate pattern, which came from a game that happened in 1869 in London, where MacDonald was playing white against Bowden with black. From this position it was black's turn, and Bowden found a beautiful queen sacrifice. So he played queen c3 check, forcing white to capture the queen, followed by bishop a3 checkmate. So here it is, Bowden's mate pattern. Let's see it once again. Checking the king with the queen on c3, sacrificing the queen, followed by bishop a3 checkmate. So that's what we call Bowden's mate. Here we have another famous position from a famous game that happened in 1859 in Bratislava, where Anderson was playing white against Max Lange with black. It was black's turn, and Max Lange found this nice attack starting with the bishop on c5, forcing the king to h1, followed by a knight sacrifice on g3, and then he moved the queen to g5, threatening checkmate on h6. The only defense that white found was rook f5, attacking the queen, because if the queen moves to h6, the rook can block off the check on h5. Now black played pawn on h5, sacrificing the queen, because after he takes the pawn on g4, we have a discovered check, and the only way for white to block this off is with the rook on h5. But this rook can be taken, which is actually checkmate. So here it is, the famous Max Lange's mate. Let's see it all over again. Check, a knight sacrifice, threatening checkmate with the queen on h6, sacrificing the queen, discover check, and checkmate. So this is what we call Max Lange's mate. Alright, Here we have another famous checkmate pattern to remember. It's called Blackburn's mate. Blackburn was playing white and he found the quickest way to win this game, which is Queen h3, threatening Queen h7 checkmate. The only defense for black would be h5, blocking this checkmate. But then Blackburn took this pawn on h5, sacrificing the queen and forcing black to take the queen because they are still threatening checkmate on h7. So after black took the queen on h5, here it comes bishop h7 checkmate. So this is what we call Blackburn's mate. Let's see it once again. Threatening checkmate on h7, sacrificing the queen, and checkmate with the bishop on h7. So this is Blackburn's mate. And this is the pattern that we need to remember, how we can checkmate in 3 moves. Well, in this position, white are winning anyway. But what if you have just a bishop and a knight in a similar position like this one? Here in this position, as you can see, white don't have material advantage, but they can still win the game in 2 moves because of the power of double check. They can either capture the pawn on g6, saying double check, forcing the black king to move to g8, followed by knight e7 checkmate, or they can capture the pawn on f7, which is again double check, forcing the king to move to g8, followed by knight h6 checkmate. So this is another valuable pattern to remember. Let's see it all over again. Checkmate starting with knight g6, or a checkmate starting with knight f7, followed by knight h6 checkmate. So that's another valuable pattern to remember. And these were all most of the famous checkmate patterns that it's good to remember, so hopefully you can use them in your games. That's all.